You are not underpaid because nobody sees how hard you work. They may see it perfectly. They also see that you avoid conflict, that you accept the first offer, that you fear appearing difficult, that you would rather carry resentment privately than state your price publicly. You call yourself easy to work with. The market may call you inexpensive. An agreeable man can become everyone's favorite employee while remaining the least powerful man in the negotiation. Because the world does not pay you for how much discomfort you prevent other people from feeling. It pays according to scarcity, evidence, alternatives, and what you are willing to refuse. And the most dangerous part is this: working harder can reinforce the exact signal that keeps your price low. The first weak term can become the ceiling you live beneath for years. A paper built across 4 studies and published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found a negative relationship between agreeableness and income, with the relationship appearing substantially stronger for men in the studies examined. This does not mean kindness causes poverty. It means excessive compliance can become expensive in environments where value must be negotiated. Starting pay matters for the same reason. Future raises are often calculated from the base you accepted before you had confidence, options, or proof. Benefits, bonuses, retirement contributions, and later offers may all be influenced by that original number. The price you are afraid to state today can become the ceiling you live beneath for a decade. But the deeper question is why harder work so often fails to rescue the agreeable man. Why does the man who stays late become more useful, but not more powerful? Why do people praise his loyalty, depend on his reliability, and still resist paying for it? Machiavelli wrote about rulers, republics, alliances, and survival, not salary conversations. But his central question still applies wherever people divide money, status, responsibility, and opportunity. In chapter 15 of The Prince, he wrote, "It appears to me more appropriate to follow up the real truth of the matter than the imagination of it." And then, "He who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner effects his ruin than his preservation." Agreeable men negotiate according to how fair people ought to behave. Loyalty ought to be noticed. Sacrifice ought to be rewarded. Additional responsibility ought to produce additional compensation. Good work ought to speak for itself. Sometimes that happens, but strategy cannot be built around sometimes. The colder question is this: what incentive currently exists for the other side to improve your position? If they receive your best work at the current price, if you accept extra responsibility without revising the agreement, and if you remain available after every broken promise, then your value may be completely visible. The problem is that they can continue receiving it without paying its full price. Your problem may not be that people fail to see your value. Your problem may be that you have made access to your value too easy. The first illusion that must die is the belief that kindness requires compliance. The opposite of weakness is not cruelty. It is choice. A kind man chooses cooperation because cooperation serves the relationship, the mission, or the standard. A weakly agreeable man cooperates because disagreement makes him feel unsafe. The behavior can look identical from the outside. Internally, they are opposites. You discover which man you are when cooperation stops being reciprocal. Strategic kindness can say, "I will help this time," but this cannot become the permanent arrangement. Weak agreeableness says, "No problem," then complains privately for 6 months. Strategic kindness protects standards. Weak agreeableness protects appearances. Strategic kindness can survive another person's disappointment. Weak agreeableness experiences disappointment as rejection. When your desire to be perceived as good is stronger than your willingness to defend your terms, your reputation for goodness becomes expensive to maintain. Patience can become permission. Generosity can become subsidy. Loyalty can become captivity. Humility can become self-erasure. Flexibility can become the permanent expansion of your role. Imagine two employees. Both are competent. Both receive an urgent request late in the day. The first man says, "I can complete this tonight, but this is the third time the scope has expanded. Before I take on another assignment at this level, we need to revise my responsibilities and compensation." The second man says, "Of course, happy to help." The first man creates 10 minutes of tension. The second man prevents 10 minutes of tension and quietly creates 6 months of exploitation. The organization learns from both men. From the first, it learns that extra value requires new terms. From the second, it learns that pressure produces free labor. People do not respond only to your character. They respond to the pattern your character permits. Kindness is strongest when it is voluntary. The moment you are psychologically incapable of withdrawing it, it is no longer kindness. It is dependency disguised as character. A weak man proves his goodness by tolerating more. A strategic man proves his judgment by knowing what should not be tolerated. Kindness without the power to refuse is not virtue, it is availability. If this distinction exposes a pattern you have been calling loyalty, like this video, subscribe to Depths of Psyche and comment with the one boundary you have delayed stating. Do not write the entire story, write the boundary. But another illusion remains. The agreeable man believes conflict itself is evidence that something has gone wrong. Harmony is not always peace. Sometimes it is the silence created when only one side is allowed to benefit. In the Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli examined the conflict between the Roman Senate and the common people. Many observers condemned those disputes as disorder. Machiavelli looked at the result and wrote, "Those who condemn these dissensions between the nobles and the commons condemn what was the prime cause of Rome becoming free." He was not praising chaos. He was distinguishing uncontrolled disorder from structured conflict. The common people gained protection because competing interests were forced into the open and converted into rules. The same principle appears in a workplace, a contract, a client relationship, or a salary negotiation. The employer wants greater output at a controlled cost. The employee wants stronger compensation, autonomy, and security. The client wants more value for less money. The contractor wants stronger terms and protection from expanding demands. These interests can cooperate. But cooperation does not erase conflict, it only civilizes it. The agreeable man suppresses this process because he wants every conversation to remain emotionally comfortable. He avoids requesting a raise. He refuses to correct stolen credit. He accepts new work without revising scope. He begins projects before payment terms are clear. He accepts deadlines he knows are impossible. He agrees to offers below the market range because gratitude feels safer than negotiation. Every avoided conversation preserves short-term comfort. Every avoided conversation can weaken his long-term position. Research on starting salaries shows why one moment of avoidance can become expensive. Starting pay often becomes the base for percentage increases. One weak agreement becomes the reference point around which later decisions are made. In one widely discussed study of graduating students, those who negotiated increased their starting salaries by an average of about 7.4%. The lesson is not that every request succeeds. The lesson is that the first offer is not always the final limit. Gratitude and negotiation are not opposites. You can appreciate an opportunity and still examine its terms. You can respect a manager and still disagree with an evaluation. You can value a client and still refuse unpaid expansion. You can preserve a relationship without surrendering your position inside it. Conflict is not automatically hostility. Conflict is the process through which competing interests become visible. The man who refuses all conflict does not create fairness. He removes himself from the process that creates fairer terms. When a demand succeeds without resistance, it is more likely to be repeated. Short-term harmony is often purchased with long-term weakness. The agreeable man usually senses this imbalance. He knows the workload has expanded. He knows the original agreement no longer reflects reality. He knows his effort is being absorbed without meaningful adjustment. But instead of renegotiating, he reaches for the tool he trusts most. He works harder. Hard work can increase your value. It does not automatically increase your share of that value. When you work harder after accepting weak terms, you may strengthen the wrong signal. You believe you are demonstrating, "I deserve more." The other side may learn he will provide more without requiring more. You believe you are proving loyalty. They may see low flight risk. You believe your sacrifice will become undeniable. They may simply update your workload. This is why the quiet, competent man is often shocked when a louder colleague receives the promotion. The louder colleague may not be better, but he has controlled the narrative around his value. The agreeable man believes self-advocacy contaminates merit. He refuses to frame his contribution because he wants the work to remain pure. Then someone else frames it for him. He becomes dependable, helpful, supportive, always willing. Notice what is absent: revenue created, costs reduced, time saved, clients retained, risks removed, systems built, responsibilities expanded. Helpful is emotionally positive and economically vague. Hard work becomes leverage only when it produces something identifiable, scarce, and difficult to replace. Labor asks, "How much did I do?" Position asks, "What changed? Because I was here, and what happens if I leave?" Stop asking whether people see how exhausted you are. Exhaustion is not a negotiating asset. Build evidence. Keep a private record of the original scope of your role, every responsibility added since then, the results you produced, the numbers attached to those results, the problems you solved, the time you saved, and the revenue you protected. Then, translate effort into organizational consequence. Do not say, "I have been working extremely hard." Say, "I assumed 3 additional responsibilities, reduced completion time by 22%, and handled work previously divided across 2 roles. The scope and compensation are no longer aligned." The first statement asks them to value your suffering. The second makes the imbalance visible. Invisible sacrifice creates fatigue. Visible consequence creates leverage. But evidence alone does not guarantee action. An organization can understand your value and still delay rewarding it. Recognition is not the same as necessity. And that is where the agreeable man encounters the next, more dangerous truth. He can be valuable and still remain weak. He can be respected and still remain underpaid. He can be essential to the work and still possess no control over the terms. Because value becomes power only when the cost of losing it is credible. This is why resentment begins to grow. You accept a weak term. You avoid confrontation. You work harder to prove your value. You receive no meaningful adjustment. You become privately resentful. Then you continue complying publicly. The cycle repeats because each stage protects the next. You fear the original conversation, so you say nothing. Then you become angry that the other side did not understand the expectations you never stated. Your anger makes you feel morally justified. But your behavior continues communicating consent. Eventually, resentment damages the competence on which your identity depends. Your attention declines. Your work becomes slower. You stop offering useful ideas. You speak bitterly about the organization. You withdraw effort, hoping somebody will finally notice what they have lost. Usually, they notice only that your performance has changed. Now you are underpaid and perceived as disengaged. Resentment is often the emotional bill for a boundary you refuse to state. Machiavelli understood that stable systems cannot depend entirely on voluntary goodness. In the Discourses on Livy, he wrote, "Men never behave well unless compelled." This does not mean every person is evil. It means incentives matter, clear systems matter, consequences matter. A professional agreement should not depend on the hope that the other person will voluntarily protect your interests while benefiting from ignoring them. Use written expectations. Define the scope. Clarify payment dates. Set measurable standards. Schedule compensation reviews. State what happens when the agreement changes. Professional structure does not insult good people. It protects relationships from the pressure of competing interests. People follow the agreement that exists, not the agreement you silently imagined. If a contract says one thing, but your behavior repeatedly gives more, your behavior becomes the operational contract. If you accept delayed payments without consequence, the client learns that the date is flexible. If you accept expanding scope without revision, the client learns that the scope is flexible. If you tolerate stolen credit, the room learns that attribution is flexible. Your resentment does not correct those lessons. Only changed behavior does. The solution is not an emotional explosion. That would replace submission with instability. The solution is controlled correction. Say, "This responsibility was not part of the original scope. I can take it on, but we need to decide which existing priority it replaces." Or, "The payment is now 14 days past the agreed date. Work will resume when the account is current." Or, "I completed the analysis being presented. I want that contribution accurately reflected in the project record." No accusation, no apology, no speech about how disrespected you feel. Fact, standard. Consequence. But even the clearest boundary remains weak when you possess no alternatives. The worst time to build leverage is after your request has already been rejected. Most men prepare for negotiation by preparing words. They rehearse explanations. They search for persuasive phrases. They imagine that the perfect sentence will force the other side to understand. But words are only the surface of negotiation. Power lies beneath them. What evidence do you possess? How scarce is your skill? How costly are you to replace? What opportunities exist outside the current arrangement? How long can you survive without an agreement? How willing are you to leave? A man with no savings, no external opportunities, no portable proof, no scarce skill, and no willingness to walk away can deliver a beautiful speech. The other side can still wait. Machiavelli distrusted borrowed power because dependence makes courage temporary. In The Prince, he wrote, "That deliverance is of no avail which does not depend upon yourself." The modern lesson is not that you must become isolated. It is that your economic security should not depend entirely on one person continuing to approve of you. Steve Jobs provides a useful example, not because his personality should be copied, but because his return to Apple reveals the difference between pleading and leverage. Jobs was pushed out of Apple in 1985. He could have spent the following years demanding recognition from the company that rejected him. Instead, he built NeXT. The hardware business struggled, but its operating system became strategically valuable. By the middle of the 1990s, Apple needed a replacement for its aging software foundation. In 1996, Apple acquired NeXT. That acquisition brought Jobs back into the company from which he had been removed. He did not return because Apple finally understood his feelings. He returned attached to an asset. He had become part of the solution to a problem the organization could no longer ignore. Do not turn this into fantasy. You do not need to build an operating system. You need to understand the mechanism. Do not negotiate only from personal need. Build something the other side has a reason to value. Develop a skill connected directly to revenue, efficiency, distribution, risk reduction, or difficult execution. Create proof that can travel with you. Build relationships outside your current employer. Learn what comparable roles actually pay. Save enough money to resist immediate desperation. Interview before you are ready to escape. Do not wait until the building is burning to search for an exit. The agreeable man asks, "How can I make them understand that I deserve more?" The strategic man asks, "What position would make understanding unnecessary?" Build documented outcomes. Build market knowledge. Build scarce and portable skills. Build external opportunities. Build financial reserves. Build the credible willingness to refuse. Words present your position. Alternatives create it. Once leverage exists, language matters because agreeable men often destroy their request before the other side has answered. Listen to the phrases they use. "I am sorry to ask. I understand if this is impossible. I do not want to be difficult. I was just wondering. Anything you can do would be appreciated." Before the request reaches the table, the man has already framed it as an inconvenience. He wants the other person to feel comfortable, so he makes his own position appear uncertain. Remove, "I am sorry to ask for a review." Replace it with, "Based on the results and expanded scope, I am requesting a compensation review." Remove, "I do not want to be difficult, but the deadline is tight." Replace it with, "That deadline requires either additional support or a reduction in scope." Remove, "I understand if the budget cannot change." Replace it with, "What flexibility exists in base compensation, performance incentives, title, or review timing?" Remove, "I would appreciate anything you can do." Replace it with, "The current market range and the responsibilities of this role support a base salary." The goal is to remove verbal submission. Use 4 parts: fact, impact, standard, request. The role has expanded to include 2 additional functions. These functions now represent approximately 30% of my workload and have contributed to these results. The compensation should reflect the current scope rather than the original role. I am requesting an adjustment to this amount. No autobiography, no accusation, no emotional debt collection, no apology for having interests. But strong language without emotional control becomes aggression. The real test begins after the request. Your manager says, "This is not a good time." The client says, "Someone else will do it cheaper." The employer says, "This is our best offer." The agreeable man feels the atmosphere change. His heart rate rises. He senses disappointment. He begins repairing the other person's emotions. He lowers the number. He explains too much. He offers a compromise nobody requested. The negotiation ends not because his evidence failed, but because he could not remain present during resistance. A man who cannot tolerate another person's disappointment cannot control his own terms. Receive resistance without reacting. I understand that the budget is constrained. Then ask for the mechanism. What criteria would need to be met for this adjustment to be approved? Make the trade-off visible. If compensation cannot change, then we need to reduce the expanded responsibilities. Reject vague delay. Let us set a date, identify the decision maker, and define the measurable conditions for the next review. Preserve the alternative. Understood. I will consider the offer and respond tomorrow. A pause is not weakness. Silence forces the other person to carry part of the tension. Your objective is not to win every disagreement. It is to stop losing your standards merely because disagreement exists. If you are a man who keeps consuming hard truths but continues negotiating from the same weak position, stop mistaking recognition for progress. You already know that leverage matters, but your real problem is that you have not built enough proof, options, and emotional control to use it. If you keep waiting for confidence before you change your position, you will remain dependent on people who profit from your hesitation. Inside Patreon, you get deeper, unfiltered breakdowns on power, negotiation, self-command, and economic leverage, so you can convert insight into a position you can defend. This is not for men collecting motivation. It is for men building evidence, standards, and alternatives. The decision is yours. There will still be forces you cannot control. Budgets disappear, companies restructure, markets change, promotions go to political favorites. Machiavelli called this instability fortuna. Fortune governs part of every man's life. But fortune does not excuse permanent exposure. You cannot control the market. You can control whether one employer remains your entire economic structure. You cannot control whether a client becomes unreasonable. You can control whether that client represents all of your income. You cannot control whether an offer is rejected. You can control whether rejection destroys your security. A weak man needs agreement to feel safe. A strategic man builds enough strength to survive disagreement. That does not make him cruel. It makes his kindness voluntary. It makes his standards real. It makes his refusal credible. Kindness is not the enemy. Weak terms are. Hard work is not the enemy. Invisible, unpriced, permanently available labor is. You do not need to become hostile. You need to become difficult to exploit. You do not need to intimidate people. You need to stop negotiating against yourself. You do not need everyone to approve of your position. You need evidence strong enough to state it, alternatives strong enough to defend it, and discipline strong enough to remain calm when another person resists it. If this video forced you to recognize where you have been compliant instead of strategic, like it, subscribe to Depths of Psyche, and share it with the man who keeps working harder while refusing to state his price. Stop asking whether people see your value. Build the proof. State the standard. Create alternatives. Remain controlled. Then let the cost of losing you speak.